My name is Leah. I'm 39 years old, and I live in a modest but cozy townhouse just outside of Seattle. I run my own consulting business, mostly from home, and I spend my free time in bookstores or walking the trail behind my neighborhood. I live quietly, purposefully, but I didn't always. The last time I saw my parents all together, we were sitting in their living room. My younger brother, Daniel, had just been handed a thick, embossed folder, the kind you only see in law offices or at real estate closings. Inside, the paperwork for a trust fund, from our parents, fully transferred, fully his. He blinked in surprise, smiled like he'd known it was coming all along, and nodded in that effortless way he does when things fall into his lap. I reached for the glass of water beside me, half expecting something similar. Not the money, but maybe a letter, a conversation, something thoughtful, something earned. Instead, my mother slid a greeting card across the coffee table toward me. No envelope, just a folded card with a gold-foiled shamrock on the front. It said, "Good luck on all your future adventures." That was it. No explanation, no comparison, just that. A card and a faint, expectant smile as if they'd given me a gift to be grateful for. I smiled back and said, "Thank you." But inside, something small and final settled in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just watched my brother sign documents while my father poured him a drink. They didn't know it then, but that card would be the last thing they ever gave me without strings. Growing up, I learned early how to take up less space. Not because anyone told me to, but because it made things easier for everyone else. My brother Daniel and I are 5 years apart. He was the kind of kid people naturally bent toward. Charming, wide-eyed, good with words even before he could spell them properly. I was the one who remembered where we left the keys, who kept track of appointments, and who sat quietly in waiting rooms holding our mother's purse while she filled out forms. Our parents never meant to draw lines between us. I truly believe that. But they did. When I came home with straight A's, they'd smile and say, "We're so proud of how independent you are." When Daniel brought home a C and a note from his teacher, they'd spend the evening brainstorming how they could help him unlock his potential. It became a pattern I didn't question. I wasn't the one they worried about. I was the one who figured things out. By middle school, I was packing my own lunches, ironing my uniforms, and reminding my dad when his car registration was due. Meanwhile, Daniel forgot to charge his phone and somehow ended up with a brand new one every other year. They called it fairness. In high school, I applied for everything: scholarships, tutoring jobs, part-time shifts at the library. I still remember the night I told my parents I'd gotten into the University of Washington. My mom looked up from her knitting and said, "That's wonderful, honey. I knew you'd be fine." I don't remember what they said when Daniel got into college. I just remember the champagne. He never had to work during school. I did. I cleaned classrooms, took notes for other students, worked late shifts on weekends while he traveled Europe during spring break with money that, if they had it, was never mentioned to me. And I never asked. I never questioned why he got help. And I got encouragement. I thought maybe that was the cost of being the responsible one. You don't get much, but you don't get much trouble either. There were moments that stood out, though. On my 25th birthday, my mom called and said, "Oh, shoot. Today's the 16th, isn't it? We'll take you out next week, okay?" That dinner never happened. When Daniel turned 25, they threw him a garden party with custom cupcakes. When he bought a car he couldn't afford and defaulted on payments, I got a text from my dad asking if I could lend him $2,000 just to smooth things over. I said yes. It wasn't even a debate in my mind. That's how deeply my role was carved. I was the helper, the listener, the one who didn't need anything, so they gave me less. And I told myself that was strength. By 30, I had a stable job and a tiny apartment filled with secondhand furniture and used books. My parents visited once. They spent most of the time talking about Daniel's new apartment, how sleek it was, how his landlord let him repaint the walls a very modern slate gray. I didn't resent Daniel. That's the strange thing. I think in his own way, he believed the world owed him a soft landing, and our parents agreed. It wasn't personal, it was systemic. The boy needed help. The girl had grit. What more could they ask of me? So I learned to wear my solitude like a second skin. I learned to be proud of not needing. I learned to sit with the silence between us, between me and them, between who I had become and who they chose to see. I wasn't angry, not then. But looking back, I think invisibility is a slower kind of heartbreak. You don't notice it's happening until you've already accepted it as normal. When I first got the invitation, I thought it was strange that my parents were hosting a formal dinner. That wasn't like them. They'd always been more practical than performative. The kind of people who wrapped gifts in newspaper and said things like, "It's the thought that counts." The email was brief: dinner, Sunday, formal attire. No occasion mentioned, just that it would be important for the family. I debated not going, but then curiosity won. I wore a navy dress and flats. I remember the weather, cloudy, like it might rain but couldn't quite commit. That kind of sky always felt like a metaphor. When I arrived, I could hear laughter coming from the backyard. Daniel's voice first, then my dad's. I walked in through the side gate, and everything was polished. Tables were dressed in linen. Wine glasses sparkled in the sun. Daniel stood near the head of the table in a crisp blazer, holding a glass of something golden. He saw me and smiled. "Leah, finally. They were waiting for you to start." I was confused. "Start what?" My parents greeted me with the same warmth they always had. A kiss on the cheek, a compliment about how thin I looked. Then my father cleared his throat and tapped his glass. "I'd like to thank you all for coming," he began. "We've made a decision about the future of our legacy, something we believe is both fair and forward-thinking." I remember standing next to my chair, not sitting yet, just trying to make sense of his words. "We've decided," he continued, "that Daniel will be the beneficiary of the family trust, effective immediately." There was a small round of applause. Daniel beamed. My mother patted his arm like a prize winner. I stood there, waiting for the next sentence, the part where they'd explain what role I played in all this. Or maybe some kind of acknowledgement. But instead, my mother turned to me and said, "We didn't want to make a big deal out of it. You've always been so capable. We know you'll be just fine." And then she reached into her purse and handed me the card. A single folded piece of cardstock, light green with gold foil, a clover on the front. Inside it said, "Good luck on all your future adventures." No note, no check, no mention of the trust. Just that. I sat down slowly. Daniel gave a short speech about carrying on the family's name and being ready to lead. He thanked our parents. He even made a joke about how I had always been the smart one, so I'd probably build my own empire someday. People laughed. I nodded along, but my thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Not in anger, not even sadness, just quiet. It wasn't just about money. It was the symbolism, the reinforcement of everything I had quietly accepted over the years, my role as background, the one who didn't need. I looked at the card in my lap. I ran my fingers along the embossed gold. I thought about every birthday forgotten, every holiday where I was the one washing dishes while Daniel got to hold court in the living room. I thought about the scholarships, the late nights, the jobs I had taken just to survive while he was allowed to stumble freely and still be celebrated. And still, I smiled. I smiled through dessert. I complimented the wine. I hugged them all goodbye, like nothing had changed. But something had. For the first time in my life, I stopped seeing my parents as people to impress, to earn love from. I saw them clearly, as people with their own limitations, their own blind spots, their own hierarchies of worth. And I saw myself as someone who had mistaken tolerance for belonging. That night, I went home, poured myself a glass of water, and took that card out of my bag. I set it on my kitchen counter, staring at the words again. Good luck on all your future adventures. That was when I realized I was no longer waiting for them to see me. I had already seen myself, and that, in its quiet way, was the beginning of everything. I was 22 when I first understood how easily I could be erased. That year, I had been offered an internship in New York. It was competitive, prestigious, and paid enough to get by if I shared an apartment the size of a closet. The kind of opportunity that could change everything. I was ready. Bags packed, ticket printed, heart pounding. But a week before I was supposed to leave, my father had a health scare, a minor heart issue that required outpatient surgery, followed by recovery at home. My mother was overwhelmed. Daniel was, of course, already abroad on a semester-long exchange program, backpacking on weekends, taking photos by cathedrals. I still remember the family email update he sent that week. Don't worry, I'm doing shots in Prague tonight. Life's good. My mom called me in tears. Leah, I don't know how to do this alone. Your father needs help with meals, with meds, and I can't take off work. Can you stay? I hesitated. I wanted to say no, but I heard her voice crack, and deep down I knew the unspoken truth. There wasn't anyone else they would ask. So I stayed. I called the internship coordinator and declined the offer. I said it was personal, family-related. I said I hoped to reapply next year, even though I knew that window would never reopen. For 2 weeks I made soup, tracked his blood pressure, drove him to follow-ups, and helped him walk from the couch to the kitchen. I kept the house clean, made spreadsheets of medication schedules, and smiled through the fatigue. My parents thanked me, of course. But they never talked about what I'd given up. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, I overheard something that still echoes inside me. I was coming back from the grocery store when I paused outside their front door. It was slightly ajar. I heard my father's voice, low, tired, but clear. I don't know why she's still here, he said. It's not like she had anything big going on anyway. She's always been practical. She'll land on her feet. He didn't mean it cruelly. That was the worst part. To him, it was just a statement of fact. I was the dependable one, the extra hands, the fallback plan, the person who didn't require investment because I'd already proven I could survive without it. I didn't cry. I remember walking inside, putting away the groceries, and offering him a cup of tea. He smiled and said thanks like everything was fine, but that sentence carved something out of me. I wasn't angry with him. Not then. I didn't yell or retreat or write in a journal. I just absorbed it like I had absorbed so many things, like I was a sponge for the soft dismissals that shaped my life. I told myself he didn't mean it that way. I told myself it was a compliment. He thought I was strong. But the truth was simpler and sadder. I had made myself so useful, so low maintenance, that they had stopped seeing me as someone with dreams at all. And I carried that forward. Every job I took, every city I moved to, every time I celebrated alone with takeout and a candle stuck in a muffin, I did it quietly. Because that's who I believed I had to be, the one who was fine, the one who didn't need. So when I sat at that dinner table years later, holding that clover-printed good luck card while Daniel toasted to his inheritance, I wasn't shocked. I was simply remembering. That moment wasn't new. It was just louder, more public, a spotlight on the same wound I'd been dressing in silence since my 20s. And for the first time, I decided I wouldn't patch it over. I would let it sting. I would let it change me. Because sometimes you have to feel the weight of the wound before you can put it down, I didn't storm out of that dinner. I didn't make a speech or break ties. I just changed direction. Quietly. Completely. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and started writing. Plans, timelines, ideas I'd tucked away for years under layers of humility and hesitation. I had always wanted to build something of my own, and now I had a reason that came from inside me, not outside approval. I started my consulting. Business 6 months later. Small contracts at first, just local startups, word-of-mouth projects, but it grew. I treated every client like a partner, listened more than I pitched, and reinvested almost everything back into the business. Within 2 years, I had 2 full-time contractors and a growing roster of long-term clients. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't post about it. I just worked steadily until my days were full and my bank account no longer needed permission to breathe. The money wasn't the reward. The independence was. I used my savings to buy into a few real estate partnerships, then made a few smart, boring investments, mutual funds, long-haul stocks, a slow build, nothing flashy. Meanwhile, Daniel's trust-funded venture launched with great fanfare. He opened a boutique branding agency with his college friends, sleek office, high-end espresso machines, even branded tote bags. But when the shine wore off and reality set in, it turned out he was better at pitching than managing. Deadlines missed, clients lost, partners walked away. By the 4th year, the agency folded, quietly, without press or explanation. I didn't hear much from my parents during that time. Just the occasional forwarded article about my brother's early success, followed by long silences, until one day, I got a call from my mother. She was trying to sound casual, but I knew her voice. She asked if I could come by for dinner, just the 4 of us. Something in her tone told me this wasn't just a visit, so I said yes. The table looked the same as it did years ago, down to the ceramic dishes and the dim overhead light. Daniel was quieter this time. Not sulking, just smaller, like someone who had run out of stories to impress with. My father cleared his throat. "We've been thinking about downsizing," he said. "The house is getting to be a lot, and with the market the way it is..." My mother nodded. "We wanted to see if you'd be open to helping. It wouldn't have to be much, just maybe something short-term. While we figure things out." I took a breath. Not deep, just enough. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, slim, neat, and marked with my business logo in the corner. I slid it across the table gently. "Actually," I said, "I've been thinking about this house too." My father opened it, and his eyes scanned the offer letter. Fair market value, clean terms, no emotional leverage. I had structured it with every ounce of dignity I wished they had once shown me. "I figured," I said. "Since you once told me I'd do just fine, I'd invest in things with potential." Silence. My mother blinked, then reached for her water. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. No hostility, just realization. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, calm and steady, letting the weight of the moment settle where it belonged. "I'm not expecting an answer tonight," I added, "but it's a serious offer, and it's clean. No strings." That was the phrase that landed hardest. No strings, because that was the first time in my life I'd sat at their table without needing anything from them. Not validation, not approval, not even affection, just clarity. And for once, they saw me. Not as a helper, not as a backup plan, not as a self-sufficient afterthought, but as someone who built something without their help. Someone who didn't just turn out fine, but who chose to live full. I left the folder with them and walked out as the sun was setting, my heels quiet on the front steps. I didn't look back. It wasn't revenge. It was closure. Because the most powerful thing I ever did wasn't proving them wrong. It was living as though I never needed to. When I stepped outside their house that evening, I didn't feel victorious. I felt light. Not in the way you do after a win, but in the way you do after letting go of something heavy you didn't know you'd been carrying. The air was cool. The light had softened. There was a stillness to the street, the kind that only comes at the very end of the day. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. I was simply walking forward. That night, I went home and placed the offer letter copy in a drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a receipt. Proof that I had finally stopped trying to prove anything at all. The following weeks were quiet. I didn't press for an answer. I didn't follow up. Eventually, they sold the house to someone else. I heard through a family friend, and I felt nothing, not hurt, not disappointment, just closure. I had made the offer for me, not for them to accept. What I gained wasn't a property, it was peace. Today, I live in a home I bought on my own. It's not huge, but it's mine. The walls are filled with books, soft rugs, and the kind of silence that feels chosen, not forced. My office faces east. Morning light pours in like a quiet promise, and on my desk, just behind my monitor, sits a small silver frame. Inside it, that green card. Good luck on all your future adventures. I used to keep it hidden in a drawer, unsure whether it was a wound or a warning. Now, I keep it where I can see it. Not because I'm still angry, but because it reminds me who I chose to become when I realized I wasn't chosen. That card isn't a scar, it's a signpost. It marks the day I stopped waiting for someone to name my worth and started living as though I already knew it. There's something liberating about no longer chasing belonging in the places that taught you invisibility. You begin to build new rooms, new rituals, new relationships that don't require you to shrink or prove or perform. And the most unexpected gift in all of this? I am finally respected for what I bring to the table. Not because someone had to invite me, but because I built a table of my own. Not being chosen by them. It hurt. For a long time it did. But eventually, I realized it was the very thing that taught me how to choose myself. Over and over, without guilt, without hesitation, without need for applause. Some people inherit trust funds, some inherit silence. I turned mine into something